Hello and welcome to our OCR podcast. I'm Anthony Day and I'm looking after our student support this summer. My guest today is Tanya Nicholas, science teacher and teen wellbeing coach, who joins me to offer some tips and advice to students and their parents to help them prepare for exams this summer. Hi Tanya, thanks for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself, your background and your role in supporting students?
Good morning, Anthony. Yes, lovely to be here with you today. Thank you for having me on the OCR podcast. Yeah, sure. So, a little bit about me. I'm originally from Melbourne, Australia. I grew up there and lived some of my early adult life there, I guess. And I've been living in the UK for the last 15 years. I suppose you could say that my career as a secondary science teacher officially started back in 2007 after moving to the UK and landing my first teaching role here in London, where I'm based now. But unofficially, I'd say that I've been working in the education sector either as an educator or an education researcher from the time I was at university, so probably the early 2000s. And my teaching career, it's taken me a few different directions. So I've had a number of different school experiences since I started teaching, including single sex and mixed schools and both across state and independent sectors. But I'd say that in the last 3 to 4 years, I've chosen to switch my focus from sort of full-time science teaching and delivering the science curriculum more in the direction of supporting the well-being of teenagers. So now my work is a bit of a crossover of working with schools and individuals as an adolescent well-being coach and mentor. And I continue to do this alongside teaching science, which is sometimes done in school, but also privately.
Great, thank you, Tanya. So you've obviously got some fantastic experience teaching and supporting students, and you've certainly seen school and education in normal times as well as during these very extraordinary times. So my next question is having moved through the COVID pandemic and experienced the ups and downs of teaching and supporting students, what are the main concerns you're seeing in students?
Yeah, it's a good question, Anthony. I think, to be really honest, like the main headlines for a lot of students, they continue to be the usual types of challenges. So, we're still talking about things like feeling stress, feeling overload, being overwhelmed, feeling very anxious, burnt out. But perhaps probably one that's become a bit more common during the pandemic is this feeling of like apathy and a real loss of their sense of direction and purpose. Obviously, because over the last couple of years, we've had this very unique situation where, first of all, exams were on, then they were off. And for a lot of teenagers, when they enter into secondary school, they know that there is this drive over a 5 year period towards achieving a certain outcome. So that's really been one that's kind of come into the fray, particularly over the last couple of years. And I'd say that some young people, there's a sliding scale of what is driving these factors. So some young people are feeling really stressed out because they perhaps haven't coped very well during the last couple of years, and so now there's an enormous amount that they suddenly have to catch up on, and something that maybe seemed, really way off in the distance a while back and not needing to be a consideration, some months ago has suddenly snowballed into this huge mountain to climb. So there's a huge feeling of overwhelm that comes with that. And, for others, it's actually that they've been tracking along really well. They're very diligent, they're conscientious, and they've sort of taken study in their stride. But now it's pressure that perhaps comes from, maybe it's themselves, but it could be externally from either the school that they're in, maybe their parents, their carers, perhaps the grades that they need to achieve in order to access the sixth form college courses that they're wanting to go into. Um, it's this pressure to hit the target that they need to in order to go in the direction that they would like to after their GCSEs or A levels. So they're incredibly worried about failing, even if they've been working consistently, and that they're constantly being reassured. For others, they're sort of maybe sitting in the middle. They don't really know how to switch gears. Like there is this thing called exams that's going to be happening in a few weeks, but they're not really sure exactly what needs to happen differently or how to be for this sort of period. So it's a bit of a mixed bag of feelings and emotions and challenges that are coming up, I would say.
And this summer is going to be the first time most of our students will be sitting an exam. So there's fear of the unknown. They're not sure what to expect and what's going to happen and how that's going to lay out. So what top tips would you share with our students on preparing for their exams, including if they're feeling stressed or overwhelmed?
Yeah, another very good question, and something that is very much on the radar of a lot of the young people that I'm dealing with. So there's a whole host of things that I could throw into the conversation here, but I've tried to strip it back, and I'm just going to sort of go with three. And I say my top three, and I'll unpack these a little bit as well. But the top three that I have are sort of, make a plan. That's number one. Number two is, be realistic. And number three is take good care of yourself. So, if, to dive into those a little bit, in terms of the first one, which is make a plan, I think, there's a really good phrase, which is something along the lines of proper planning and preparation prevents poor performance. I know that everybody, again, kind of sits on a range in terms of how much they like to schedule their time. And for some students, they like things to be absolutely definitive in terms of structuring their whole day. So having a school timetable works incredibly well for them. So really coming to an understanding of the type of individual that you are, whether you like to work with a lot of rigidity and knowing that you need to know that when you wake up at 7 a.m. or when you wake up at 9 a.m., that your whole day is mapped out and what you've decided to do from 9 till 10 and then 10 till 12 and so on, you follow that kind of recipe. For others, it might be that they like to have a bit of flexibility for how they set things up. So they know that on day one, they want to have a go at studying subject A, B, and C, but there isn't so much rigidity in how they put that into their day. But they know that by the end of that day, they want to have those sort of three things done. And along with the making a plan, I would say that it's also about sort of, making sure that you're confident. So doing things that actually boost your confidence to begin with. Maybe going to a subject that you are a little bit more comfortable with and trying a question that's a little bit easier in the paper if that's your method of revision, just to help, calm your nerves and actually restore your own faith that you actually can do this. And then by conquering that little hill, it makes it a bit easier to tackle some of the things that are a lot more tricky for you. So that's, some of the things that I would suggest under kind of making a plan. The second thing is to be realistic. And what I mean by that is know your strengths, but equally, absolutely know what your weaknesses are too. So your strengths can be things like, knowing that you are very good at crunching numbers and data when you're fresh first thing in the morning. So you might like to act on revising subjects that have that particular requirement. So something that's very maths based, or maybe in the sciences, you would tackle those subjects sort of first thing in the morning when you know that you can handle that kind of learning at that time of day. And perhaps you leave some of the more creative and free flowing types of material. So things that you would typically do for English or art, drama, those more creative subjects, you leave them to a different time of the day when you know that that's what you're more likely to want to deal with. And as I mentioned, on the other side of that are being aware of what your weaknesses are. So these are absolutely not something to be ashamed of. And in actual fact, I would encourage everybody that's listening to this to just, you know, take a moment to just be really real with themselves and say, okay, I know that actually these are the things that I find really difficult. And the sooner that you can actually bring them into the light, the quicker and easier it actually becomes to tackle those and do something about them. So, for example, it might be knowing that you're actually very good at setting aside the time to study. However, you also know that when you sit down to study and your phone is right next to you, that you actually get very distracted. So, you're acknowledging that your weakness is, well, having my device here is not very useful to me while I'm trying to get this study done. So, being proactive and again, empowering yourself to take steps that turn those weaknesses into a strength. So, moving your phone into a different room. It's not forever, but it's just to help you take that step in the direction of that success that you're striving towards. And it doesn't actually have to always look like, answering a question for a particular subject without making any mistakes. It can be doing these small things that actually set you up for better success. And the final part to that second one of being realistic is, I would say, if you know that you're really struggling with a subject or a particular topic in a subject, then please do ask for help. I think there is a quite a stigma around particularly young people, even acknowledging that they might need help. There is this perception that we have to know all the answers. And one of the key things that I offer some of the young people that I work with is recognizing that they can't do it all by themselves. So if you know that there's a topic or a particular subject that you are finding really difficult, reach out, at least to your teacher or perhaps to a friend who seems to understand this material really well, so that you're not allowing what already appears or feels like this really daunting task, it doesn't actually get any bigger than that. So make sure that you're asking for help. And I think the third component that I mentioned was really taking care of yourself. And this almost probably should be at the top of the list, to be honest, because, if we're not actually looking after ourselves, it's very easy to fall into a routine, particularly when we're going through quite a stressful period of doing the basics to keep ourselves going. And, again, there's no shame that comes with this. We all do what we need to do in order to survive and get through those circumstances. But I think if there can be an approach to sort of treating your body as the thing that has to get you through this period, making sure that you're doing the basic things like eating really well and staying hydrated in the way that's actually going to set your body up to work the best way that it can over this period. So we might tend to want to steer towards obviously foods that give us that quick hit of energy, drinks that give us that quick hit of stimulation. So, caffeine, lots of sugary foods, but overall, they're not going to be helpful to us if we're consuming a lot of these types of foods and drinks during this period. So, eating healthily and drinking water to keep you hydrated, definitely getting in some exercise and getting outdoors if you can, just taking a mindful walk. If you've got a pet, it's a great excuse to get outside and walk the dog. And rest and sleep are actually going to be huge components of this. So, again, it's very easy to think that we need to burn that candle almost all the way down to the wick at both ends. So, studying many, many hours in the day and then not getting enough rest, but rest will keep your mind and a lot of those feelings that are coming up, the stress and the anxiousness, really at bay if you're able to get enough enough sleep, not stress. Um, and then, yeah, reducing screen time is a big one as well. So I'd say that those are probably my three main tips for just helping to deal with some of that stress and overwhelm.
Thanks, Tanya. I'm sure that our listeners will find those really, really helpful in setting up the structure and routine that they need over the coming weeks and months. And definitely the most important thing is, if you're struggling, to reach out and speak to a teacher, a friend, a family member, and remember that you're not in it alone, and you don't need to struggle on. So I'd also like to talk a little about results day and beyond. So hopefully students will be happy with their exam results, but what would your advice be to students who may feel disappointed with their results and worried that it'll impact on their next steps?
Yeah, this is really critical for sort of how to manage what to do next. So I think probably having an idea of the potential outcomes now is something that can reduce some of the anxiousness that people might be feeling right now, but it will also provide a bit of a roadmap for where to go if that eventuality does end up happening. So as much as you might be sort of putting it, kicking the can down the road, so to speak, and not wanting to worry about, that possible plan B outcome until later. I think if there's an idea of what you could do if you end up with results that you weren't anticipating, then it can at least set you up to know what direction to go. So I would be doing things like perhaps, making sure that you're talking to the teachers of your subjects so that obviously, what your plan A action is going to be. But if you know that if you don't necessarily hit that target, and this is where also any careers teachers or sixth form coordinators, but also the sixth forms that any GCSE students or indeed university that A-level students might be going on to, if they know their entry requirements and they've had a conversation with the course coordinators and know that there isn't, an alternative pathway, or they know what the potential possible pathways are if pathway number one doesn't eventuate, I think that's just a way of managing one of those other levels of anxiousness that can come in. But I think, and I know it's much easier said than done, but the key is going to be to not panic. Like, there is going to be more than one way that you can get to where you want to go. And even if it doesn't happen with the results that you get from this period of exams, then having some alternative pathways, or knowing what your alternative pathways might be, I think could be a really helpful way of just keeping keeping those stresses under control.
Thank you, Tanya. So finally, parents and carers will undoubtedly feel they have a huge responsibility to support their children preparing for their first exams this summer. What hints or tips would you offer parents and carers on how best to support their children?
I think this kind of comes back to the same advice that I've given for students in terms of taking really good care of themselves as well. I mean, there is that great saying of, obviously when we're on board an aircraft and the emergency sign comes on and the oxygen masks drop from the roof of the aircraft, there's a suggestion that you need to put your own oxygen mask on before you can actually help anybody else. And it's a bit the same in this situation, Anthony. If our parents, carers, those people who are around our young people are expecting A, but sort of modeling and doing B, it doesn't necessarily create the most mutually inclusive sort of environment. So I think, the adults in those spaces, if they're doing the things that keep them healthy, if they're doing the things that keep their mind calm and peaceful, if they're, modeling what they know that they would need in the same set of circumstances. Sometimes we can find it really hard to remind ourselves of what it's like to be a teenager, but perhaps just thinking about how it would feel if you were applying for a new job, or, applying for a mortgage, and the stress that comes with sort of adult things, and what you would really appreciate from the people that are around you and how you need to be supported. I think those are sort of the first steps. But, finding out what they need. I think a big one for teenagers is sometimes they don't really know how to communicate, and perhaps giving them that space to actually talk to you. So ask questions. Don't make assumptions that, they're feeling a certain way without actually asking them. So asking them and talking to them. And I would really encourage parents to perhaps reach out to, other friends, acquaintances that they have who have either had this experience with their own children, or, someone who maybe does work with individuals, young people who can actually be that support for them. Just thinking about sort of what you would need in that moment yourself, and therefore what could you do for someone who's maybe experiencing that same kind of challenge at the moment. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Tanya. That's really helpful. Thank you so much for sharing your tips, which we hope will help any student and parents listening. And all the best to your students taking their exams this year.
Thank you so much. And I just want to wish everybody that is sitting an exam this year all the best. You've made it through 2 years of a pandemic. You're almost there.
Thank you, Tanya. All the best.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you for joining us, Tanya. And to everyone listening to this podcast, I hope you found it useful. For more information on the support available from OCR as we head into the summer exam series, please visit www.ocr.org.uk/support.